Good day, everyone. I'm Zara Gagatiga, and I'm here to share with you my paper, School Librarians Responding to Change During the Pandemic. For this paper, I was able to work with private school librarians for a survey. So the school librarian term in my paper is limited to the experience of private school librarians only. So let's go on. So for today, I have 4 talking points to share with you. The first one is Buhay Librarian before COVID-19. The second one is What Keep Us Awake at Night. The third is Epiphany, So What? And then the last is Life Goes On because it is a hopeful world. For the first point, I will be sharing with you the context and the background of school librarian life before COVID-19. For the second point, I will be presenting the inquiry statement and the thesis statement that I made as guide for when I researched and wrote the paper. And for the third point, Epiphany, So What? I will be presenting the survey and the results of the survey, the important ones, particular to the inquiry statement and the thesis statement. And the last, Life Goes On, because it's a hopeful world, we'll be talking about the findings and the recommendations of the paper. Here we go. So, Buhay Librarian before COVID-19. Before COVID-19, school librarians portray many roles. And over the years, I've interviewed school librarians and featured them on my blog. Joy Nera in 2013 shared with us that she's very much happy working with children, having children, meeting children in the library who shares with her things they learned from a book. Veronica Silagpo, who's also a school librarian. I interviewed her back in 2013 also for a blog feature that I wrote about. She shared with us what makes her work interesting and pleasurable. It's the little chit-chats she has with patrons. She enjoys finding information and looking for books that children are looking for and would love to read. She also loves giving book recommendations, and always that desire to promote reading to young children is paramount to her work as a school librarian. She also believes that there are students really who will not read, who are hesitant to read, only because these students have not found the right book that matches their interest. So, we now go to Miss Melissa Odono Naval, who's also a school librarian, and back in 2018 in our interview, she told us about the many hats that she wears as a school librarian. She's a teacher, a parent, a friend, a counselor, and working with teachers and faculty in the learning community provides her with a rich dynamic in developing relationships with them for teaching and learning. She also emphasized that there are library policies and procedures that must be observed, and that working with faculty and teachers would mean meeting them halfway. So, Melissa here is talking not just about the regular job of a school librarian promoting reading, helping students find information, matching them with the book that they would enjoy, but also an aspect of working with other stakeholders and leaders of the community. There's also a hint of administration in the story of Melissa working in a school library. Daryl Marco in 2013 shared with us in the blog interview that he worked as a school librarian with teaching responsibilities. Yes, there are stuff he needs to do, cataloging, classification, doing reference work, but the teaching part weighs heavily on his shoulders as a school librarian back then in 2013. This would entail lesson planning, sitting in meetings for curriculum planning, observing behavior, and considering them as information for when he creates lesson plans for library skills instruction. Indeed, the school librarian before COVID-19 has a lot of roles and responsibilities associated with pedagogy, working with teachers, administrators, even parents, and the school community. A school librarian is a reading advocate, a school library administrator, of course. A school librarian is also in charge of reference and research as guide, a teacher and facilitator, a storyteller, and a school library program coordinator. Yes, there are activities and programs under each role or job and task that librarians do, and they're all exciting, if not challenging at the most. So that was life before COVID-19, but COVID-19 happened. And here we are. At the beginning of the lockdown, many school libraries and school librarians adapted and adjusted how to transition from face-to-face to a digital and online learning platform. It was a challenging transition. A year after, Scholastic Philippines invited me to conduct a workshop or a webinar for their partner schools. This was in April 2021. And for that webinar, I thought about touching base with private school librarians to examine two things. First, how they are as school librarians. On a personal level, how are they responding to the changes and challenges of COVID-19? Second, I would I wanted us to reflect on the different changes that the pandemic brought and how it has affected our roles and responsibilities as school librarians in a learning community that has gone digital. And so those are the things that we grapple with. So to be able to generate data, reflection, stories, experiences from school librarians, all 123 of them answered a survey previous to the webinar. Of course, I conducted the webinar, but after much thought, I decided to write a draft paper for that and to frame my direction in research and completing that paper, I came up with an inquiry question. What do the responses of school librarians to change brought by the pandemic inform and result to the continuous delivery of library services and programs? Let me repeat. How do the responses of school librarians to change brought by the pandemic inform and result to the continuous delivery of library services and programs? And then my thesis statement as my guiding statement for the paper is such. The pandemic brought changes in the way school librarians perform their roles and responsibilities. Thus, as valued partners in the teaching and learning experiences, collaborative strategies and methods need to be in place to support them through the challenges of online distance learning. So, the survey is divided into two parts. The first one is interpersonal response to pandemic, wherein questions about personal development, health and well-being, and relationship with the self were put together. The second part are responses to school library work during the pandemic, which covers the different changes and challenges that they encounter, support from school leaders, services and programs that changed and adapted to to an online platform, and the roles that school librarians actively portray or do in the school library in an online environment. And so what happened? What was the result of the survey? For the interpersonal response to the pandemic, the school librarians who answered the survey, all 123 of them, expressed fear, anxiety, worries, and stress during the pandemic. There were also feelings of anger and sadness and grief, but of the dominant emotions that librarians felt, At the time of the pandemic, it was mostly fear, stress, and anxiety. How did they cope recognizing the fear, the stress, and the anxiety? Majority of the librarians said that connecting with friends and relatives through social media helped them survive day to day fear, stress, and anxiety. They also thought about strategies to cope with daily life, such as yoga, exercise, journaling, taking up a new hobby, becoming a plantita or a plantito, anything that would bring back that sense of life and a way of belonging in this time of the pandemic. So the second part of the survey is the response of school librarians to their work during the pandemic. Overwhelmed with the changes and challenges were the number one response, but they were supported by their school leaders, and for them, it was of utmost importance. What kind of support did they get from the school leaders? The school leaders articulated the plans that the school has for the next 2 years during the lockdown. And this somehow has given the librarians a sense of certainty in a time when everyone is dealing with a new virus that scientists are still figuring out what to do with, even to this day that we have vaccines. It was also important, second to, to their list, was the emotional and well-being talks and kumustahan that they have in school. Different schools would approach it differently, but school librarians appreciated it very much to have their school leaders, to have their school community, gather them once a week or twice a month, have the HR call on them, check on them, because in a way, it bridges gaps of feeling isolated. The third result in the survey is the learning of technology. Since there's a big demand for movement or transition from one platform to another, to learn different apps, to all of a sudden create a website and teach information literacy skills, integrating it with different media and technology, librarians had to scramble and be creative in learning technology for the delivery of online services and programs. And the last important result from the survey was the emergence of new roles. Before COVID, librarians are readers, reading advocates, teachers, facilitators of research, guide in reference and reader services. The pandemic has opened up new roles for school librarians, and this is an exciting thing. It is something that I think school librarians should pay attention to as we begin moving to the opening of the school on site, on campus in the next few months. And so life goes on because it's a hopeful world. There are four roles that were identified as relevant to school librarians, not only during the time of COVID-19 as a way of responding and surviving to the call of the times, but also in the future when we go back to school for blended learning, when we arrange schedules with our students and our co-teachers for classes, be it a face-to-face session or an online session. These are important roles that librarians have identified as something that they can learn further on. Number one, teacher of media and information literacy skills. Number two, content creator. Number three, research facilitator. And number four, technology consultant. Apparently, all these four roles have been identified by Montiel and Overall in 2005 in a paper that tackles school librarians collaborating with teachers. So meaning, if before COVID-19, teachers and school librarians are already working together, during COVID-19, of primary importance is collaboration, and post-pandemic, collaborating with teachers, students, and other stakeholders of the community is something that school librarians must develop and enrich for the continued services of the school library. So life goes on. It's a hopeful world. In June 2021, PASLI conducted another survey of its members to check how we are as a collective group of school librarians. And because they know, Fastly learned of the survey and the webinar I conducted with Scholastic and its results, they picked it up for another focus group discussion that involved Fastly, public, public librarians, and the National Library of the Philippines, sponsored by the Philippine Board on Books for Young People. And during that focus group discussion, there are several items which PASLI President Charito Basagre presented to the group. And this is also these roles of the school librarian presented by PASLI, or the activities that school librarians do during the pandemic, is very important in connecting the school library with other stakeholders of the community, namely the barangay, the families, the public libraries in the community. So for school librarians surviving and responding in during the pandemic times, they found themselves doing a lot of library instruction. There's library orientation at the beginning of the year, information literacy skills instruction that moves up the grades from kinder to grade 12. And there are many librarians also who set up vlogs for their learning community. For the circulation of library services, school librarians came up with book drive, book pickup, and curbside pickup for those, of course, who can drive and pick up books from the school library. Reference services would involve Ask a Librarian using a chat group, a virtual chat, and a Grabrarian service for a question and answer or reference service inquiry for students. Librarians also set up websites, created infographics, and made use of social media even more for current awareness services. The continued reading promotion, such as online book trivia nights, wellness Wednesdays, online kapihan, meet and greet an author, and book bingo, were all set up by school librarians who were given the infrastructure support, the school leadership support, and support by the teachers as well as they do the activities. And so where do we go? From here, we look at how teachers and school librarians can collaborate. Of course, there are many agencies and departments that librarians can work with because it's a community that we're building when we teach children and when we provide services from the school internally and externally. However, I would like to focus on collaboration as an important aspect from the survey, given the 4 important roles and how it can be done. So here is a recommended um, framework and concept map which I put together so that we can have a clearer grasp and understanding of how teachers and librarian can work together. A teacher has a knowledge of pedagogy, basically on the needs and skills of learners, on content and subject area knowledge, and the librarian also has a knowledge of pedagogy in terms of how knowledge is created, how information moves from one step to the other, how creation and communication of both information and knowledge happens, and what is involved in the creative process, and how can we learn when we make use of resources and we manage them in the K-12 experience. So if the teacher has all this expertise in pedagogy and the librarian also has a knowledge of skills in this pedagogy, then we can look at collaboration as a shared process a shared understanding where teacher and librarian can come together. Teacher and librarian can trust each other, can think together, and can work effectively and meaningfully towards teaching and learning experiences. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for listening in.